Administration's failures. I'm Dan Bongino in Tonight for Sean. Less than 3 months into office, and the Biden administration's failures are mounting. This includes Joe's crisis at the southern border, where tens of thousands of migrants, inspired by President Biden's rhetoric and policies, are now flowing into the country. Sarah Cardle will join us with some shocking new images straight ahead. But first, it was one of the worst press conferences ever conducted by a sitting U.S. president, ever. For a little more than an hour, Joe Biden stood in front of the world and struggled to get words out. At times, he seemed lost and confused, and he frequently became agitated. This despite several handy cheat sheets in front of him, pictured here. Ari Fleischer said it was, quote, bewildering to see Biden read answers from a script. Joe even had a large piece of paper with reporters' pictures and names, pre-ranked, to help Joe know who to call on and in what order. Of course, our own Fox News' Peter Doocy didn't make that list. Apparently, taking tough questions from Fox News is a big no-no for a guy who can barely complete a coherent thought. Today, here's how Jen Psaki circled back to the issue. Take a look.
We noticed, starting at the end of the campaign, and then into the transition, and here at the White House, anytime that the president has an event where he is given a list of reporters to call on, Fox is the only member of the 5-network TV pool that has never been on the list in front of the president. And I'm just curious if that is an official administration policy.
We're here having a conversation, aren't we?
Yes, but
and do I take questions from you every time you come to the briefing room?
Yes, but
has the president taken questions from you since you came in? He came into office?
Unfortunately,
yes or no?
Only when I have shouted after he goes through his whole list. And the president has been very generous with his time with Fox. I'm just curious about this list that he has given. So the only member of the 5-network pool never on it, dating back to when he resumed in-person events in Wilmington during the end of the campaign.
Well, I would say that I'm always happy to have this conversation with you.
So, a little recap here. Joe took 0 questions from Fox. He read directly from a cheat sheet on almost every answer, and still, Joe Biden managed to lie over and over again. He lied about the border, he lied about taxes, he lied about China, and remember Biden's vow to unite the country? Yeah, that was hilarious. Well, apparently, that was a lie, too. Watch this.
If you do run, will Vice President Harris be on your ticket?
I would fully expect that to be the case. She's doing a great job. She's a great partner. She's a great partner.
And do you believe you'll be running against former President Trump?
Oh, come on. I don't even think about it. I have no idea. I have no idea whether it'll be a Republican Party. Do you? I know you don't have to answer my question, but I mean, do you?
Joe Biden is clearly in way over his head, but the liberal media doesn't care. They'll support him no matter what he does. Watch this.
These families, many of them are saying they are coming because they believe this is a more compassionate administration. And the president didn't back away from that. He said today, this is who we are. That part of it is not going to change.
Yeah, he did not turn back when asked about being a good guy, the decency of this presidency and the American people. He said he embraces that part of the argument.
It goes back to COVID. It's the only piece of news he intended to make, and he made it. There wasn't a single question on it, which tells you what other thing, Lester? There's clearly not any negative questions to ask. A press corps asks you about challenges. They don't necessarily ask you about things that are going well. COVID's going well right now for him.
It's good if you're an American and you were watching that, you noticed a change of tone. You actually heard somebody that was trying to bring Americans together.
Joining us now with reactions, Fox News contributor and media columnist for The Hill, Joe Concha, and former White House press secretary and Fox News contributor Ari Fleischer. Ari, who better to go to than you on this one? You have a little bit of experience, just a bit, with White House briefings. So, what I find interesting about these briefings is, and I think Joe mentioned it yesterday, I saw one of his appearances on Fox, the media becomes adversarial when it's a Republican, and they phrase questions in the form of propaganda when it's a Democrat. I mean, that Yamiche Alcindor question, you're such a wonderful guy, Joe, is that why people are coming here? Ari, is that really a question?
Well, obviously it was softball yesterday for Joe Biden, while it was spitball for 4 years with Donald Trump. And you don't get to just do that if you're a reporter. You're supposed to be fair and neutral, in the middle, objective. But let's just do an experiment, Dan. Let's just say for a second that Donald Trump was still president. Mitch McConnell was the majority leader of the Senate, and Republicans controlled the House. And Mitch McConnell said, we're going to abolish the filibuster. I think it's racist. We're going to get rid of it. It interferes with us getting our Republican agenda through. We're pro-life. We're for tax cuts. We're going to change America. Do you think at a Donald Trump news conference the press would have been basically cheerleading him on for when are you going to get rid of the filibuster? Are you against it? They'd have been the first ones saying you're stopping on minority rights. The press would have been offended, and it would have shown in every question they asked. They would have interrupted the answers. Here, acquiescence, roll over. Make your case, Mr. President. We'll put the ball on a tee.
Yeah. Joe, I saw one of your appearances on Fox after. You were on fire. I thought you did a really great job. I think you called it a disgrace or something to that effect. I agree with you. And one of the things I find particularly offensive about the media in the new 2-month Biden era here is, where are the fact checkers? Joe, remember every single thing Trump said? He said, hey, I had a Diet Coke for lunch. They're like, we're fact checking. It was a Diet Pepsi or whatever. Where are the fact checkers now? They seem to have all disappeared.
But the ones on television, Dan, certainly have. After every Trump appearance, there would be, for instance, CNN's fact checker at the ready, comes out of the on-deck circle, and then goes through X, Y, Z. This guy, you can find Edward Snowden before you can find CNN's fact checker on television at this point. But look, the questions were meek. They were vague. The president's conduct unsettling in terms of having to actually look at a list of reporters with their photos next to it in order of who to call on. The leader of the free world is afraid to call on Fox News or other reporters deemed to be adversarial by asking tough questions. And trust me, President Xi and President Putin in China and Russia, respectively, are paying attention to this, saying, okay, who are we dealing with here? Oh, he's afraid of his own press corps. I guess probably we could do whatever we want now, because how is he possibly going to stand up to us? And look, Chuck Todd, you played him before. He says, well, there are no negative questions on COVID. The press only asks questions when it's challenging. Oh, I have a question on COVID because I'm a parent of a 5 and a 7-year-old. Mr. President, you said that you would reopen schools in your first 100 days. You would listen to the doctors and the science and the data. Your own CDC director says that it's safe to open schools now, regardless if teachers are vaccinated or not. What do you say to parents who say reopen now and not because of a COVID bill that doesn't spend money on reopening schools, billions of them, until 2022 when the pandemic is over? Or, Mr. President, you assigned your vice president, Kamala Harris, to fix the problem, the crisis, the disaster at the border that you won't call a crisis. Yet she compared ICE to the KKK. She laughed when a reporter asked, when are you going to go visit the border? Is this really the right person for the job, Mr. President? Those are specific questions that could have been asked yesterday. Instead, we saw cotton candy questions, and basically, you know, Ari brought up T-ball and softball. It was the Grapefruit League, because grapefruits are actually as big as softballs, but they're softer, and that's what we saw from most reporters yesterday, Dan. And it was just so depressing that they had 9 days to prepare for this, given that this was announced 9 days ago, 9 weeks to prepare for this, given that the president took office, and this is what we got yesterday. It was a disgrace. That's exactly as I called it, actually. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Joe, I see your energy hasn't dissipated from yesterday. Very well done. I like that.
Pixie Ari, sticks and 5-hour energy, not a good combination.
Yeah, especially not at 9 o'clock Eastern at night. I got to go to bed after this show. Ari, so one of the things I find particularly offensive about the media's coverage here is the lack of the follow-up. You know, with the Trump administration, everything was a follow-up. If it wasn't an interruption first, they don't follow up. He says things that are factually incorrect, like his data about the Trump tax cuts, which were off yesterday, Biden, and nothing. You get a question and everybody moves on.
Here's the core problem. The White House press corps, and this has been the case for the Washington press corps for decades, and most reporters in general, They basically line up in agreement with a Democratic policy agenda. When it comes to spending increases, the press corps is for it. They're against tax cuts. When it comes to what Donald Trump did on the border, the press thought it was wrong. What Joe Biden's doing, they think is right. They'll tell you they're neutral, they don't have opinions. They have opinions. And you know how you know? Because when a president is a Republican or Donald Trump and they stand up before the press is hot to trot, on their feet, fast to interrupt, fast to challenge, fast to ask the follow-ups. Did anybody follow up with Joe Biden when he said that it was racist, that the filibuster is racist? To say, well, you were racist when you filibustered, Mr. Biden. Was Barack Obama a racist when he filibustered? It's as if they forgot how to be a reporter because they're just content to roll along and help, actually, by acquiescence, Joe Biden's policies get put into effect because they're not offended by his policies. They were offended by Trump. They're offended by Republican policies. They're largely offended by conservative policies and conservative thought. So it is natural. It's spontaneous. They don't need to have any plans or meetings. It's who they are. It's the original sin about who goes into journalism in the first place. And that's why I would so much rather be a Democrat dealing with the press any day than a Republican, because they back you on policy and then they roll over on all the rest.
Yeah, that's just sad to see. Joe, have a chamomile tea, get some rest. Ari, thank you both. We appreciate it. Now let's turn to Biden's crisis on the southern border. Last night, Senator Ted Cruz led a congressional delegation to the Rio Grande in Texas, where they encountered human traffickers and cartel members. Watch this.
We're at the edge of the river. On the other side of the river is Mexico. The other side of the river, we have been listening to and seeing cartel members, human traffickers, right on the other side of the river, waving flashlights, yelling and taunting Americans, taunting the Border Patrol, because they know that under the current policy of the Biden administration, they can flood over here. They're getting paid $4,000 or $5,000 a person to smuggle them into this country, and our policies, when they smuggle them in, the Biden administration releases them.
According to Senator Susan Collins, the Mexican cartels are now controlling who comes across the border, and that human trafficking, child abuse, drug smuggling are all rampant. Meanwhile, look at your screen. These shocking new images from inside one migrant facility show just how horrific this crisis has become. As overcrowded border stations are now packed, men, women, and children. Joining us now with the very latest is Fox News contributor Sarah Carta, live from Roma, Texas. Sarah.
Hi, Dan. Yeah, I'm here in Roma, Texas, where right behind me there is actually a makeshift processing center because so many people have been flooding through this small border town. I want to show you something here, Dan, just to give you an idea. Within less than 5 minutes, I picked up all these armbands. These armbands are basically given to the migrants that are crossing illegally by the drug cartels. They say things like llegadas, that means you've got here. Other things like entradas or entregate, turn yourself in. These armbands are issued by various different human trafficking organizations. They're like tagging people like cattle, and they're charging them various different prices, according to the Texas Department of Public Safety, who I spoke with, as well as the Border Patrol. I spent some time with the Texas Department of Public Safety that, through Governor Abbott and his Lone Star program, is kind of filling in the gaps for the Border Patrol, both on land, sea, and air. And I want you to take a look at this. What is the real national security implications of these cartel wars and these drug cartels in Mexico?
So right now, because of the current situation, we have an increase in criminal activity. They're desperate right now. And they see the current situation, and they're exploiting that current situation.
You're not only dealing with the drug cartels, but you're dealing with an increase in young women and children. And I mean, so you have to be very aware of what's going on. It's got to be a challenge for you.
It is very challenging. These cartel members don't like the interception of the vessels coming in and deterring what they're trying to bring across. It be narcotics or, you know, migrants across. So they do get very upset, especially because that's money lost on their end.
Oh, it's a completely...
So right in here is where they cross most of the people. Right in here, there's a landing that they'll cross with the rafts.
Well, you can see down below where people were camped out. You ever fly out here and then you see something going on like a cartel fight or a
see why are they trying to get away. And then further downriver, they may push a load of dope all at the same time because they know that our manpower is just, we're stretched thin.
Dan, as I'm talking to you right now, I can literally hear people behind me in the brush coming through. It's incredible. You hear the dogs barking, you hear the people moving, you hear that movement. They are walking straight up. They are turning themselves into Border Patrol. That's directly behind me. Now, last night, I spent some time with roughly about 19 senators that showed up here to see what was going on. Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Ron Johnson, and others who were here because they know this is a crisis. They know this is a problem. Even the night that I was there last night with Senator Ted Cruz, I ran into a group of migrants in the darkness. I mean, they came out to me, Dan. They were scared. They were frightened. I told them, you know, I'm not law enforcement. I'm a journalist, and that they were willing to talk to me. I mean, it's a really frightening situation, but I want you to take a quick look at what we did last night. This is your state.
Yeah.
And you see what's happening here. What goes through your mind? What's the first thing?
It's heartbreaking.
Right.
It is a crisis that's unfolding, and it's getting worse and worse every day.
The most insanely dangerous, dumbest thing I've ever seen.
You can hear the smugglers across the way, right?
This is a sign put down by the federal government to let illegal immigrants know where they need to go to turn themselves in.
What's going through your mind as you see this?
This is a disaster, and it's a man-made disaster, and Joe Biden is the man that made this disaster.
Dan, that night, we could literally hear the smugglers yelling at us, taunting us. They were screaming, hey, Jefe, laughing. They were making fun. They actually thought that it was probably just Border Patrol there, and they were dumping people off onto the banks. Children as young as 3 years old. I want you to just think about that. Little children in the middle of the night in some of the most dangerous situations, some of the most dangerous terrain. And right now, as people will probably be crossing in a little bit, the smugglers and the drug cartels are moving drugs and other contraband in other areas of the border. We are going to be back Monday night with the full package. We're going to be working through the weekend. And neighbors here, just to wrap it up, they came out to talk to me. They said they've never seen anything like this. And this is coming from a small border town here in Roma, Texas. They have people in the back of their yards huddled up in the middle of the night. They see families walking through here. And they also tell me that they're terrified, that there aren't just good families, but there's some really bad people. I hope everyone joins us Monday night.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you. You've been doing tremendous work down there covering this exploding crisis. It's a real shame, but thanks for your work. Coming up, the crisis at the border is getting worse as Joe Biden continues to push his dangerous America Last agenda. And as usual, the media mob continues to cover for him. Dana Lash and Leslie Marshall join us to react. Coming up next. The border worsens by the day. The Biden administration continues to restrict media access to the migrant holding facilities. But the person Biden put in charge of the border, Vice President Kamala Harris, had a different view when Trump was in the White House. Take a look.
Thank God for a free and independent press. You know, all these folks being down in Texas and here in California and at the border and giving the American public a close-up look at what's really happening as opposed to the rhetoric coming out of this administration.
But, as usual, the corrupt and partisan media continues to spin for Joe Biden and his border failures. For example, the Washington Post was forced to correct a headline that claimed there was, quote, no migrant surge, despite there being a record flow of unaccompanied minors at the border. And a newly revealed internal memo from the Associated Press shows they were actually warned. They warned their staffers not to call the situation at the border a crisis. Also new tonight, DHS Secretary Mayorkas is reaffirming this administration's commitment to fortifying DACA, while saying, quote, only the passage of legislation can give full protection and a path to citizenship to the dreamers who know the U.S. is their home. Joining me now for reaction, radio talk show host Dana Lash and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall. Welcome, ladies. This immigration topic is hot with me all the time. Hey, how are you all doing? And Dana, congrats on your the extension of your radio contract. I know people love you. There'll be a lot of Lash and Bongino from 12 to 3. I don't know if America can take it. But we'll find out.
I'm going to interrupt you. Congrats to you too, Dan, because you're on the airwaves. Congrats to you as well, my friend. Everybody knows that Dan and I go way back. We're good friends.
Yes, way, way back. So I'm going to start with you on this. Listen, this is not a seasonal surge here. The Biden administration has trouble with the facts. When you look at the pure data here, we've never seen numbers like this crossing in this season during a seasonal surge ever. They're just lying. You would think the media would follow up and call them out on this.
I think you raised a really good point, and especially that video that you played of Kamala Harris saying what she said just a couple of years ago. There's a huge difference. I mean, even at the peak during the Obama presidency, I mean, this is what, 6 to 7 times. I hear like fluctuations between that number, but it is way more than what it was at the peak of the Obama presidency. And we're not even in, Dan, as you know, we're not even into like the major crossing time, which is, I think, what, towards the end of spring is when usually Border Patrol says they see the most people crossing. We're even hearing from Democrat mayors on border towns, and these are people who never, they were pretty critical of Trump, and they were very celebratory of Joe Biden when he was elected into office. And now you see Border Patrol, now you see mayors, these Democrat mayors of towns saying, wait a minute, you are overloading us. We don't have the budget to handle what these policies have done and everything that's going on. Border Patrol, I mean, we're seeing the same lack of resource that we saw, but a 6 to 7 times worse crisis. So, and it is a crisis. And I think the fact that the Associated Press now, they're trying to tell their journalists, well, only quote crisis if it's someone that you're quoting. The longer that they refuse to accurately report on this, I think the worse it gets and the more suspicious they make the public.
Yeah, no, I agree. Leslie, the euphemisms game here is just nauseating. This is obviously a crisis, Leslie. I mean, everybody can see what's happening on camera. If you don't acknowledge a crisis, it seems to mean or imply you're not interested in solving it. I mean, do you agree or disagree that this is a crisis?
I've said all along that it's a crisis, but it's not what you call it, it's what you do about it. And let's look at numbers, okay? And I want to talk about the media, because before this segment and before other shows that I did today, when you look at all of the pushback and the fact-checking, even CNN fact-checked Joe Biden and said he was wrong when it came to unaccompanied minors, and when he said that the minors and the immigrant families coming over were being turned around at a higher rate. It's 41%. Overall, 70% are being turned away. Here's the problem. It is not Democrat or Republican. And Democrats and Republicans have to work together to get immigration done. One of the problems is asylum. You have to come to the checkpoint or be in the United States to apply for asylum. That can be changed, not by the President of the United States. Donald Trump couldn't do it. Joe Biden can't do it alone. That has to be done by our congressional body, by our elected officials. But politicizing this right now is beneficial for Republicans. Politicizing it for the past 4 years was beneficial for Democrats. But at the end of the day, it doesn't solve the immigration problem, which needs a multifaceted, comprehensive legislative approach, because asylum is just one of the many issues. There's the backlog. Why are these people leaving? Money that's been cut to go into these countries, and more. And with regard to the drug cartels, you had a great piece with Sarah before that. If you go online and you do all the research and you look at the numbers, for 17 years we've been dealing with drug cartels. And for 17 years, by the way, crossing has been highest in January, February, and March over our borders, even at the checkpoints.
Yeah, Leslie, I get that. But, facts and data kind of matter, right? You'd agree? You believe in numbers and stuff, right? So I have the numbers right here. So in the last season, we had 66,000. Dana, I'll have you respond, and Leslie, I'll come back to you. But we had 66,000 was the peak during the season under the Trump administration. Dana, we've now had 100,000 under Biden. It's not even close. We haven't had a number like that in the last 10 years. I mean, if facts and data matter, by what metric is this not an exploding crisis?
No, they do. And I understand the arguments that some make that, well, there are more variables that go into this than just, whether it's regulations on asylum or MPP, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, that seems to intimate that the United States has a responsibility to solve the economic problems of every other country. I mean, every other country in the world has its own issues, but not every other country in the world, Dan, is expected to just open its borders and allow everyone in and is smeared and has their character impugned if we choose to do as every other other country, including Mexico, chooses to do, which is to be a little bit more deliberate about the process when people are coming in. I mean, this has been a problem for a long time, and Republicans and Democrats have kicked the can down the road. But I think the issue with this is the way that the press is treating it and the way the press is covering it. To go back to that original point, you saw the press. I mean, I remember back in 2017, there were articles that were talking about the cost of keeping kids in cages. I think that was one of the phrases used. Nobody's talking about that now, Dan. You don't see any of those articles in the press about that. You don't see any Democrats down at the border crying in parking lots in front of chain link fences. So the media coverage is vastly different, and that's driving this. And that's one of the reasons, again, why people are so suspicious of the media. We can't expect media to be honest about what is happening at the border, especially when it concerns our national security, it concerns our residents that live at the border, and our tax dollars, too.
Yeah. Leslie, I'm sorry. I want to get back. I'm just out of time. I'm sorry. I have to get back to you another time. But a great debate. Thanks a lot, ladies. I really appreciate it. Coming up is Nancy Pelosi trying to steal a House seat from the GOP, of course. Senator Joni Ernst will be here. Plus, another day, another scandal for zero experience Hunter. We'll explain after the break. House Minority Whip Steve Scalise and Charlie Hurt.
On SiriusXM, anytime, anywhere. Fox News Audio on SiriusXM. America is listening.
Now Nancy Pelosi and the power-obsessed Democrats are continuing their quest to try and steal a House seat in Iowa, where Republican Marionette Miller Meeks has already been certified as the winner in the state's 2nd district. But the Democratic candidate, Rita Hart, is launching an effort, backed by Pelosi and other House Democrats, under the Federal Contested Elections Act, to overturn the result, which she lost by 6 votes. And get this, Pelosi isn't even trying to hide this brazen power grab. In fact, she says she wants credit, yes, credit, for how she's handled it all. Take a look.
If you had lost a race by 6 votes, wouldn't you like to say there must be some way that we can count this? Many members were saying, don't seat the person. You know, you're naming a few who are saying, let's move on. But I'm saying then people said, why should we seat somebody to have votes for all this time? But it would have been under the rules allowable for me to say, we're not seating the member from Iowa. We did not do that. So I want credit for that.
So let's be crystal clear here. It's Democrats who want to overturn a state-certified election, and they're not even trying to hide it. Voters in Iowa should decide who represents them, not Nancy Pelosi. Here to explain more is Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So there's some history here. That the history of the Bloody Eighth in, was it 1984-85, where the Democrats did this before. They have the right to seat their own members in stolen election. And as I remember, that didn't end well. The Republican Revolution followed. I don't think this one's going to end well either if they're allowed to do this.
Right. I would agree, Dan. And this is the worst of worst when it comes to hypocrisy. We have an election that was certified at the state level by a bipartisan board of canvassers in this election. Bipartisan, and yet here Rita Hart, the Democratic opponent, wants to take this to Nancy Pelosi, not through the Iowa court system as required by Iowa law, but to Nancy Pelosi, a partisan, to overturn this election.
Senator, just to be clear, because you said something important there, a bipartisan board of canvassers, I believe it was 5-0, said the Republican, Miss Miller Meeks, won the election. I'm not crazy, right? I'm not making any of this up. I mean, you're in Iowa. You know better than me. It was a 5-0 unanimous certification of the election, correct?
Yes, it was. Again, bipartisan, and it was unanimous. 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and they said yes. The ballots were counted. They were recounted. Marionette still won. It was certified at the county level, then went to the state level even, and that's where that bipartisan board said yes, everything was done properly, and Marionette Miller Meeks won this election fair and square. But that doesn't sit well with the Democrats nor Democratic opponent Rita Hart. And again, instead of going through the appeals process through the Iowa courts, she's going straight to Nancy Pelosi to overturn that seat.
Senator, I got about 30 seconds, but quick question for you, wrapping here. How is this going down in Iowa on the ground? I live in Florida. I know the national story, but on the ground in Iowa, this can't be, the perception there has to be terrible of this attempted theft of a congressional seat.
Yes, Dan, even Democrats in the 2nd District have said that if Nancy Pelosi overturns this election, it would be a very bad thing. They don't agree with it at all. And those are Democrats saying that.
Yeah. Good, good. That's good to hear. Senator, thanks a lot for joining us. I really appreciate it. Tonight, we're also learning more. We're learning more about the bizarre 2018 gun incident surrounding Hunter Biden and his late brother's widow, Haley, involving a firearm that was reportedly tossed behind a Wilmington, Delaware grocery store. Because according to the New York Post, texts from Hunter Biden himself suggest that the Secret Service was involved in the incident, despite contrary claims from the agency. Quote, "She stole the gun out of my trunk lockbox and threw it in a garbage can filled to the top at Jansen's. Then told me it was my problem to deal with," end quote. Hunter wrote, according to messages obtained by the New York Post. Hunter then continued, quote, "Then when the police, the FBI, and the Secret Service came on the scene, she said she took it from me because she was scared I would harm myself due to my drug and alcohol problem and our volatile relationship," end quote. And there's even more. Because according to Politico and new documents obtained by the Federalist, Hunter may have lied on his federal Form 4473 about his past drug use when he answered no to question 11E about drug and substance abuse. And today, Senators Grassley and Johnson have sent letters to the Secret Service, the FBI, and the ATF demanding answers about the incident. We've reached out to Hunter Biden's lawyer for comment, but have yet to hear anything back. The Secret Service has denied the agency was involved in the gun store incident. Joining me now for reaction, House Minority Whip Steve Scalise, along with Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. Congressman, I'll go to you first. This is just contributing to the growing perception in America that there are two sets of rules for the bow tie wearing elites and for everyone else. I mean, this can't possibly be received well. We're reading Hunter Biden's own text. It's not like we made this up.
Yeah, Dan, there are a number of really serious concerns that are raised when you read that Politico article. Frankly, it mentions multiple potential violations of federal law, not the least of which, as you mentioned, if he lied about drug use on the federal form, but also just throwing a gun in the trash can. If you read the article about some of the conversations he had with police, it almost sounds like he was getting testy with police because they were asking him basic questions. There were slurs that were made about people here from Mexico. I mean, a lot of things in that police report that are very alarming. But again, you've got President Biden right now talking about passing more gun control, making it harder for law-abiding citizens to get a gun. And yet here you have a case of his son who, from all appearances, broke multiple laws and gets off scot-free. And like you said, what does the Secret Service even have to do with this? Joe Biden wasn't vice president. He didn't even have Secret Service protection at the time. And yet the Secret Service went and tried to pull the gun records from the gun store. Luckily, the gun owner didn't give those records over to him. But again, what are they doing trying to get those records? A lot of serious questions that ought to be raised. But we shouldn't be passing gun control to make it harder for law-abiding citizens. Stop people who break the law from getting away with it scot-free.
Yeah, I mean, the irony here is so thick. It's impossible to ignore, Charlie. And one other component to this. You know, Charlie, if this was a story, forget about Don Jr., if this was a story about Don Jr.'s cousin's friend's neighbor, and Don had a hot dog at his house 30 years ago, this would be a front page story everywhere all over the cosmos. And yet, because it's a story about Hunter Biden, it'll receive a light touch everywhere.
No, the massive cover-up for the Bidens is something that we've never witnessed before in modern American politics. It's just appalling. And by the way, I know a lot of gun owners. All three of us, we all know lots of gun owners. I don't know anybody who would, first of all, throw a weapon away in a trash can in a high-trafficked area like that. In the first place. In the second place, I don't know anybody who would ever lie on one of those forms. And the fact that you have, clear questions about whether Hunter Biden did lie on those forms raises all kinds of very important questions that obviously need to be answered. But of course, the most appalling part of all of it is the fact that here we are at a time where, as you point out, Joe Biden and Democrats are talking, unlike they've talked ever before, about going after law-abiding gun owners and making it harder for law-abiding gun owners who would never do any of these things to prevent them and to curtail their abilities to protect themselves, protect their families, and to protect their neighbors. But this is just the way apparently the way the Bidens roll, and it's disgusting, and we have to get to the bottom of it. And I think a big reason why politicians often do this sort of thing, they go for the shiny object and try to come up with new rules that they want to go after, is because it's an admission that they have failed to enforce all of the laws that are currently on the books. And that's usually how bad things wind up happening.
Yeah, good point, Charlie. Congressman, is there any appetite whatsoever on the Hill to investigate this family anymore? I mean, how much is this guy going to get away with? Talking about Hunter, I mean, the accusations here are the stuff of almost legend. Payoffs from Russian oligarchs. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, again, if it involved anyone even close to the Trump orbit, it would be a cosmic scandal from like an Avengers movie. Is there any appetite to investigate here?
Yeah, Dan, and you can see there's already requests being made for this to be investigated. I'm waiting for the Biden Justice Department to investigate. But again, if you replaced the words Biden with Trump, and then you read that article, the Politico article that really goes into detail about the police report, alarming questions all throughout, if that was Trump instead of Biden, every newspaper in the country would be all over it. It would be the lead story on all of the mainstream media outlets, and yet crickets, like everything else. But people are watching this. It's like the double standard you see with so many of these Democrat officials who break the rules. They tell you to live by one set of rules. They're living by another. They're trying to take away your freedoms when they're not even complying. They're trying to take away our gun rights as we speak in Washington, and the president of the United States himself is talking about going nuclear and blowing up the filibuster in the Senate to get gun control and make it harder for you to get a gun, and yet his own son looks like violated multiple laws. Why don't you enforce the laws that are on the books instead of going after people who aren't breaking the laws, like Hurt said?
Yeah. Well, Congressman, thanks. Please follow up on that. I mean, really, America needs accountability here, so we really appreciate it. Charlie, Congressman, thanks a lot.
Absolutely.
Coming up, we'll bring you the latest on Joe Biden's soft stance on China. Plus, the former CDC director believes he knows where COVID originated. We'll tell you when, we'll tell you where when we return as a special edition of Hannity continues. Competition with China, but doesn't want a confrontation. Really, Joe? China's repeatedly confronted the U.S. through one-sided trade deals, stealing our intellectual property, and openly mocking the U.S. delegation in Alaska just a week ago. And most of all, will Beijing ever be held accountable for covering up their role in spreading the deadly coronavirus? And breaking tonight, former CDC Director Robert Redfield says he believes the virus did in fact escape from a Chinese research lab, raising even more questions about China's role in all of this. Take a look.
I am of the point of view that I still think the most likely etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory, escaped. Other people don't believe that. That's fine. Science will eventually figure it out. It's not unusual for respiratory pathogens that are being worked on in a laboratory to infect a laboratory worker.
Joining us now to explain more is author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War, senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, Gordon Chang, along with former Deputy National Security Advisor and author of Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People, KT McFarland. KT, I'll go to you first. You know, I thought this was a conspiracy theory. We were told a year ago when we were covering this story that this potentially could have leaked from a lab, that we were all nuts and were to put our tinfoil caps on. Now we have the CDC director, former, saying we may not be crazy after all.
Yeah, and the former director of the CDC, he's a virologist by trade. You know, he's not just a scientist, he's not just a doctor, he's a guy who's made his entire career on studying viruses. So when he says something, even if he says, in my opinion, you take it really seriously. But what I look at, Dan, as I look at what's really happened, and not what the Chinese have said, but what have they done? So number one, when the virus showed up, what did they do? They pushed aside the Chinese CDC and World Health Organization people, and the Chinese military took over control of it. Number two, they shut down Wuhan. They didn't let Chinese people go in and out of Wuhan. They shut it down, but they encouraged international travel in and out of Wuhan. And then when any country tried to shut the borders with China, like the United States did and President Trump early on, what do? They call them a racist. So all of those things, they really make the Chinese look very complicit and very guilty, regardless of what they've said. And then to add to it, they never even let international scientists in. They're just now letting scientists in to look, but they're not letting American scientists in to look. They've had a year to cover up the evidence.
Yeah. Gordon, one of the things going on at this Chinese research facility there were these gain-of-function experiments where they make a virus or try to make a virus either more lethal or more infectious. Kind of an interesting component to this story, no?
Well, certainly. And it was not just gain-of-function experiments. It was gain-of-function experiments on coronaviruses. And they stored more than 1,500 strains there. We also know, Dan, that they did not adhere to safety protocols. And also, the first known case of coronavirus, according to Beijing, occurred just a few miles from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the facility we're talking about. And by the way, the first known case had nothing to do with the seafood market, which is the source that Beijing talks about. You start putting this all together, along with the things that KT said about China sending its top biological weapons expert to head the lab there so she could clean it up, General Chen Wei. It just seems so unrealistic to believe that it was just a zoonotic transfer. It had to have come from the lab. By the way, Beijing was not very interested in trying to find the source of the coronavirus, according to the most recent WHO mission to Wuhan. And the reason is because they knew where it came from, and in all probability, it was the lab.
Yeah, KT, I only have about 15 seconds left, but can we ever trust China again after this incident?
I wouldn't. And what's even more upsetting is that China has stolen, hacked, acquired the data, DNA data of the majority of the American people. What the heck are they going to do with that?
Yeah, that can't possibly end well. Gordon, I just want to note, you've been saying a lot of this for a while now. I've been way ahead of the curve on this story, so thanks for your attention to that. More of this special edition of Hannity right after the break.